In the middle of the ocean, there was a girl who lived upon a rock. This was not an ocean like the one you have imagined, nor was the rock like the one you have imagined. The girl, however, might be as you imagined, assuming you imagined her as thoughtful, soft-spoken, and overly fond of collecting cups. I'm Ben Grange.
And I'm Bethany Davidson, and this is Cosmere Journeys.
Bethany, you and I both grew up in religious households. I'm not sure about you, but every night my family would gather in a circle and read our books of scripture together. My parents used this as a mechanism for teaching us their beliefs and instilling in me and my siblings the values that they held most dear in life. Now, as a child with ADHD, I absolutely hated trying to sit still during scripture study. But as an adult, even though I don't practice the religion I was brought up in, I can still understand why my parents thought this was such an important daily ritual. And I'm wondering, did you have any similar experiences?
Yeah, I absolutely did. Growing up, a staple of every evening in my house was our family devotions. It was always how we ended our days, gathered together, reading and examining a certain passage of scripture and talking about what it meant for the way we live our lives. Although I have some mixed emotions surrounding these times, I do see so much value in taking a piece of text and analyzing it for life lessons together, which is why I was so interested when you brought up this idea for us to take this journey into the Cosmere and read these books as a form of wisdom literature with real-world applications that we can use as guiderails for our lives. Now, the Cosmere is a literary universe created by the author Brandon Sanderson, and many of the books in this universe focus intently on religion, on gods and deities, on the political and societal structures that are formed around these religions and gods, and most importantly, the impact that they have on the mental, physical, and spiritual health of the characters in this universe.
A lot of us look to literature as a way to find meaning in life, and I know that with an absence of religion in my life, I've used books to help me feel connected to the world around me and find new purpose in life. That's what we are hoping to do with Cosmere Journeys, to share that same sense of purpose with Cosmere readers. Now, in the Cosmere, deities are called shards. It's important to note that the shards aren't technically gods, but rather pieces of God, and each shard possesses a singular attribute or trait by which its purpose is defined, such as honor, whimsy, preservation, and many more. In every episode of Cosmere Journeys, we are going to dive deep into the chapters of the Cosmere and look at them through what we call shard lenses, meaning that we will read the chapter with a specific shard's attribute in mind. Essentially, the shard lens we choose will be the theme for the episode, and each week, we'll choose a new shard lens to look at our chapters through. So, Bethany, why are we doing this shard lenses exercise, and what are we hoping to accomplish?
Yeah, I think anytime you read a book, reading for certain themes can really help you to understand the text on a level you've never thought of before, and learn to apply that new understanding to how you live your life. Reading for themes like hope or love or even depression or death can help you to learn more about those themes and about yourself. And that's really the goal of this podcast, to explore the Cosmere and find the life lessons embedded within. I'm so excited to put my shard lenses on for this first book.
Yeah, I am too. So for new readers of the Cosmere, we are going to keep things pretty light, spoiler-free, and we've chosen a good entry point into the Cosmere. The first book we'll be reading is Tress of the Emerald Sea. The narrative framework for Tress is like that of a fairy tale, and it's narrated from the viewpoint of a major character in the Cosmere named Hoid.
And we're going to see a lot of Hoid throughout this podcast, and not just in Tress either. If you have no experience with the Cosmere, Tress is the perfect place to start. But if you're a longtime fan, we can't wait to explore this universe more with you.
Today's episode will cover chapters 1 and 2 of Tress, the girl and the groundskeeper. In chapter 1, we are introduced to Tress, a girl with wildly untamable hair who lives on an island in the middle of an ocean. Tress likes collecting cups, and more specifically, the stories behind where those cups have been. The ocean is not a regular ocean. Instead of water, this ocean is filled with green spores that continuously fall from one of the planet's moons. If these spores get wet, they experience explosive magical growth that can be harmful and even deadly to humans. The only way to kill these spores is with salt or silver, and so Tress enjoys drinking tea from her collection of cups with salt added in to protect against the spores, which is gross. Despite all of this, However, Tress is perfectly content on her island.
And then in chapter 2, we're introduced to Charlie, who is definitely the groundskeeper at the Duke's mansion and not actually the Duke's son pretending to be a groundskeeper. Just as Tress is fond of cups, Charlie is fond of telling stories. Tress is a window washer at the Duke's mansion, and whenever she gets a new cup in her collection, she likes to bring it to Charlie. Tress brings Charlie a pie in this chapter, and together they inspect a new tin cup with some strange writing on it. Charlie tells the cup story while Tress listens, and after a lot of banter where Charlie invents a whole string of excuses about how he is decidedly not the Duke's son, Charlie and Tress both understand that they enjoy each other's company not because of cups or stories, but on a much deeper level. It's actually all about gloves, but the gloves are going to have to wait until later.
We'll see more of those gloves later. Okay, Bethany, before we put on our shard lenses for these 2 chapters, let's play a game of Would You Rather. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
Okay, here we go. Would you rather drink salty tea every day for the rest of your life or sneeze on a pile of these verdant spores once?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so I think you snuck in every day for the rest of your life. I don't remember that being there.
I did.
I fear that I would have to choose the disgusting salty tea because sneezing on a pile of verdant spores could kill me. So I think I would just have to be miserable and drink salty tea every day for the rest of my life.
You know, I would agree with you. I might take my chances with the spores. That sounds so miserable every day for the rest of my life. I don't like salty drinks. For example, my colleagues and I, a few years ago, we were in Vegas and we went to a restaurant and they were all drinking margaritas. And one of my coworkers, she got this salt-rimmed margarita and she was like, oh my gosh, you have to try this salt-rimmed margarita. It's the best margarita I've ever had in my whole life. And I tried a sip of it and I was like, oh my gosh, I hate this profoundly. So if I had to drink salty tea every day for the rest of my life, I would say no to that. And so I'll choose the spores.
That's funny. I think I can one-up you, though, because I also hate salty drinks. Like, my margarita has to have a sugar rim, but I also hate tea. Like, sweet tea, salty tea, it doesn't matter. I don't enjoy tea. So I feel like I have even more of a reason to choose the verdant spores, but I still gotta choose the tea.
I guess, you know, when you put it that way, life is always more precious than spontaneously dying from violent green spores. Maybe you're right there.
This message is for all you writers out there. If you're writing a book, you've probably felt times of intense motivation while working on your manuscript, only to be followed by stretches of time where you can barely open your laptop. This is where 30/30 comes in. 30/30 is a free global writing challenge with thousands of writers from all over the world. The challenge takes place 4 times every year, and the goal is to write 30,000 words in 30 days. Complete each goal, and you'll have more than enough material for a full novel. So if you struggle with motivation or consistency, or even if you just want a community to cheer you on as you work on your book, join 30/30 at 3030k.com. That's THIRTY30k.com, and you'll find yourself writing the end before you know it.
In 1985, a man by the name of Mark Hoffman created something both incredibly and highly dangerous. Over the previous 5 years of his life, Hoffman made a name for himself as a purveyor of rare and hard-to-find documents, letters, and other curiosities. People who did business with Hoffman described him as strange. He seemed to know exactly where to find these rare items and be in just the right place at just the right time to find them. Hoffman walked into a used bookstore in New York, purchased a book, and as he was walking out, in the pages of this used book, he uncovered a first edition copy of the Oath of a Freeman, a document first printed in 1639, a document that historians believed lost to the sands of time. News spread, and multiple organizations were interested in acquiring this document for its historic and collectible value. The Library of Congress considered paying a staggering $1.5 million for this single piece of paper. In 1985, Hoffman starts to feel the heat of this discovery because, as it turns out, it wasn't a discovery at all. He'd planted the document in that book before buying it, and prior to that, He'd forged the document himself, a process that took months to execute, an attempt to forge something lost to the sands of time. This wasn't his own invention. He didn't write the words or create the original document. This was, however, a byproduct of invention because in 1639, a woman by the name of Elizabeth Glover brought the first printing press to the colonies for the first time and established the first printing business in British North America. And the first document that they printed was the Oath of a Freeman, which was an oath that every man took upon becoming a citizen of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Over 300 years later, a master forger would use that document as a means to secure a huge amount of wealth, but the law caught up with him, and in an attempt to escape, 2 innocent people were killed.
Wow, I had never heard that story before, but what a clear look at how much value humans have placed on invention for hundreds of years now. But Ben, I am wondering, aren't we supposed to be talking about the Cosmere?
Yes, we absolutely are. And I know this is a little roundabout, but I've been thinking a lot about the concept of invention lately, and we'll get to how this ties into the Cosmere in just a little bit. But one of my favorite inventions of all time is the printing press. Most of us are familiar with the Gutenberg press, but most people don't know that he wasn't the first to create a printing press with movable type. Centuries before Gutenberg created his press, Chinese nobles and Korean Buddhists were experimenting with movable type printing presses. Outside of printing itself, paper and ink, writing and language, those are some of the earliest forms of human invention, and they've stayed with us through thousands of years of human change and iteration. So when I think of invention and language and printing, the story of Mark Hoffman is one that I often think about because, just like you said, we as humans do place so much value on historical artifacts that show us the genius of our species.
Yeah, we do, although that Hoffman document did turn out to be a forgery.
Yeah, it did, but I don't think that's the important part of this story, if you know what I mean.
That's true. In fact, I think that Elizabeth Glover is the hero of that story for bringing the invention of the printing press to the colonies and starting the first colonial publishing group, for creating something that so many historians and collectors seek after.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely right.
Now, I think I know where you're going with this, so let's put our shard lenses on and bring this conversation back to Tress and read those first 2 chapters through the lens of invention. Ben, where did you first see invention pulling the strings in these first 2 chapters?
You know, one of the first places I saw invention happening in this was on page 1. When Hoyd begins to describe Tress and her unruly hair, he says, "Men often described the girl as having hair the color of wheat. Others called it the color of caramel, or occasionally the color of honey. The girl wondered why men so often used food to describe women's features. There was a hunger to such men that was best avoided." So Hoyd doesn't give us a single food that men used. He gives us 3, implying that they also probably used other brownish yellow colored foods to describe Tress's hair, almost as if there was a need for these men on her island to constantly come up with new ideas for how to describe her hair, and they could only ever think of food.
I'm not loving the food descriptions, but what does it have to do with invention?
Great question. I know this is a little roundabout, the same way that the story of the Oath of a Freeman was maybe a little roundabout when talking about invention, but I didn't see it until rereading the chapter through the lens of invention. Later on in the chapter, we see that this rock that they live on is pure black salt rock, meaning that nothing can grow on the island naturally. Anything that grows required the people who lived there to invent something, such as compost vats for soil to keep the salt out, and water pumps to pull up water from the depths of the island rock. So I hadn't thought of it this way until now, but invention is essentially a means of survival for these people. And that brings us back to the foods that these men used to describe Tress's hair: wheat, caramel, honey. All of those foods required inventions in order to be grown on or imported to their island. And the men certainly were best avoided, but their hunger was subconsciously being impacted by the way survival has required these people to relentlessly invent.
I love that you bring this up because later in chapter 2, we actually see Charlie talk about Tress's hair too. And he calls it the color of sunshine, something that doesn't require invention in order to experience. It shows Charlie is wanting to connect with Tress on a deeper and more complex level than just simply base human need.
Yeah, I love that too. When we chose invention as the theme for these first 2 chapters, I was a little worried that we wouldn't have much to talk about. But after reading with this shard in mind, I'm seeing it everywhere.
Yeah, me too. It was fun to keep my eye out for it while reading, and there were so many scenes that it stood out to me.
So when did you first see invention pulling the strings in these chapters?
This might seem a little random at first, but one of the passages where invention first popped out for me was actually with Tress's pies. Hoyt tells us that Tress spent all day inventing a new recipe with the hope that she would see Charlie's face light up the way it did when he tried it. And one of my love languages is cooking and baking for my loved ones. So I related to Tress so much, and I can only imagine how inventive she had to be to create something that Charlie hadn't experienced with the very limited resources she had available. Because remember, the island has essentially no vegetation and Tress does not come from money. So it doesn't surprise me that it took her a full day to invent a new pie for him. It seems like a small thing, but what a beautiful portrayal of how much she cares for Charlie.
I love that you bring this up because it ties so well with the way men describe her hair. Some use food, implying consumption and aggression and base human instinct. And Charlie uses sunshine, which is more poetic and romantic. So Tress makes food for the man who uses sunshine to describe her, instead of giving food to the men who use food to describe her. Something I noticed right away in chapter 2 was Charlie's insistence that he's not the Duke's son, but rather the groundskeeper. Every time Tress questions him about something, he invents a story or an excuse about why he actually is a groundskeeper and not the Duke's son.
Like his story with the plant and the sword.
Yeah, like the story with the plant and the sword. Tress asks him why he has a sword if he's a gardener, and Charlie says the sword is actually for gardening. It's the gardening tool of choice on the King's Island. And then he cuts off a leaf from the only plant on the mansion's grounds.
Tress also asks him why he's wearing the doublet and hose of a lord, and Charlie responds that he is actually a decoy for the Duke's son in case of assassins.
Bethany, you mentioned earlier that just like Tress is fond of cups, Charlie is fond of stories. Charlie is, from the first moment that we meet him, dissatisfied with the expectations that life has placed on his shoulders. This is a pretty common human experience, and Charlie deals with it by telling stories. In essence, he's inventing an ideal life for himself by spending time with Tress, a life he knows he probably won't ever be able to experience, and so he pretends. He invents stories.
And that's one of the things I love most about Charlie, how easily he can make up these stories. Sometimes, honestly, they're pretty bad, but other times they are quite enjoyable. Like when Tress brings him her new cup and he tells her a story of a civilization that just up and vanished from their island 300 years ago.
By the way, listeners, if you're new to the Cosmere, remember this story about the vanished people. It will be important like 10 books from now.
I think the word you're looking for is interesting.
I think it might. Okay, no, it is interesting. Okay, yeah, I think you're right. Interesting is what I was going for, but still, if you nerd out for interconnected worlds within a literary universe, remember this when you next read about the Iriali people.
This is true. But anyways, Charlie continues the story. He says that a fisherwoman supposedly found the cup on this abandoned island and then passed the cup to her son, who then became a pirate, who buried the cup with his treasures in the Spore Sea. And then when Tress asked Charlie if any of this was true, he just shrugs and he says, "It could be."
I also love how inventive Charlie is with stories. Not everyone can pick up a cup and make up a backstory for it on the spot, but it says a lot about his character and how he grew up. He must have been inventing stories about a different life for himself from a very young age.
Yeah, I think many of us, like Charlie, often find ourselves in situations that we don't want to be in, whether that's by choice or by birth. And sometimes all we can do is tell ourselves stories about the life we wish we could live. These stories have power and give us the courage and motivation to try to see our dreams fulfilled. But other times when dreaming isn't enough, we have to move beyond inventing stories about who we wish we could be and take those tangible steps towards becoming that person. I think that might be a lesson Charlie will learn before the story is done.
I think that's a lesson that we all should learn before our stories are done. Fans of the Cosmere will know that the lore runs deep. Bethany, for our new readers not as familiar with how the universe operates, can you explain in simple terms what realmatic theory is?
Absolutely. So realmatic theory is a scholarly concept in the Cosmere, and it states that everything exists simultaneously within three realms: the physical realm, cognitive realm, and the spiritual realm. The physical realm is experienced through our primary senses: sight, smell, taste, sound, and touch. The cognitive realm is perceived in how an object or person views itself or is viewed by others. And the spiritual realm is what connects us to the souls of people and objects around us. And yes, objects do have souls in the Cosmere.
They do. So, with that understanding of the three realms of the Cosmere, this next segment of the podcast will feature what we are calling realmatic theory analysis. Many forms of close reading of sacred texts and wisdom literature will seek to understand a single passage or segment from multiple viewpoints and applications. Realmatic theory analysis is our way to do a single passage Cosmere deep dive.
Here's how it works. In each episode, we'll take a passage, a paragraph, or even just a sentence and analyze it through its physical, cognitive, and spiritual implications. Step 1, we'll take the passage and analyze its physical implications: what the characters feel, what is before them. Step 2, the cognitive implications: how a character or object is viewed or views themselves. And lastly, step 3, the spiritual implications: how the souls of the characters and objects are connected to the things and people around them. So Ben, what passage are we going to view through realmatic theory analysis?
I want to look at the very end of chapter 2. Tress has just asked Charlie why he takes off his nobleman's ring when he's around her. She notices there's a white mark around his finger where it would normally go. Here's the passage. "But why then do you take off your ring?" He glanced at his hand, then met her eyes. "Well, I guess I'd rather you not mistake me for someone else, someone I don't want to have to be." He smiled then, his timid smile, his "please go with me on this one, Tress" smile, because the son of a duke could not openly fraternize with a girl who washed the windows. A nobleman pretending to be a commoner, though, feigning low station to learn of the people of his realm, why, that was expected. It happened in so many stories. It was practically an institution. So step 1, the physical realm. What are our characters feeling? What is before them?
With this passage being so focused on Charlie's identity, the first thing that comes to my mind is that Charlie is feeling the absence of that ring on his finger.
He is, and what I find is super interesting about this is Charlie's ability to come up with a good story. And speaking of not feeling his ring on his finger, this is so applicable to my life right now, because this morning I dropped my son off at preschool and I was holding his hand with my left hand and walking him in, and it was super windy. And when I let go of his hand, I could all of a sudden feel wind on my hand where I normally wouldn't feel wind. And I looked down and I could not find my wedding ring at all. And I was looking everywhere on the ground. I couldn't find it. I went into the front office. I left my phone number. I told them that I was missing my wedding ring, and I think it fell off when I was holding my son's hand, and nobody could find it. We stayed there for like 15 minutes looking around for my wedding ring, and we couldn't find it. And I came home and I just sat down. I looked around for it, maybe hoping that my ring would be somewhere at home and that I'd accidentally taken it off sometime earlier. And I sat down and I started answering emails, and I looked down on my mouse pad right above my keyboard, and there is my golden wedding ring right there that I had absent-mindedly taken off of my finger the night before when I was replying to emails and hadn't even noticed that I'd taken it off. So this is like a very personal story for me right now, with Charlie taking off his ring, trying to pretend that he's somebody that he's not. Now, I wasn't doing that because I was pretending to be somebody that I wasn't. But there's a very physical sensation that comes with removing an object from your body that you are so used to wearing, that you've been wearing for the last, in my case, almost 14 years. And with Charlie, he's done the same thing. His whole life, he's had that ring on his finger. And so when he takes it off, he has this very physical, visceral reaction to becoming somebody that he's not. And when I thought that I had lost my wedding ring, I broke down and I had to tell my wife. I walked into our office. I just broke down and I started crying, and I was like, "I'm so sorry. I think I lost my wedding ring. Now for Charlie, he's doing it because he wants to connect with Tress. And that is a completely different from my story just now. But those feelings of having that object removed from your body do something so real to you. They make you feel so different than when you had that on before. And I just thought that was such an interesting coincidence that happened to me this morning. And we are talking about this passage of Charlie and his nobleman's ring today.
Yeah, that is so scary. It had to be such a relief to find your ring. I can't even imagine. I had almost similar experience this week. I'm always fidgeting with my rings, and I was wearing my wedding ring in the car and moving it around, and the stone popped out from my engagement ring. And thankfully that happened while I was just moving it around. One of the prongs was broken. So I'm not wearing my engagement ring, just my wedding band. And it feels so strange. So I understand that feeling you're talking about of not having that ring on when you're expecting to have it on your finger when you've felt it for so long. So yeah, I can't imagine how scary that would have been for that time you thought it was lost.
Yeah, and how scary it is for like losing a diamond or a stone in your own wedding ring and just feeling that absence of something that is so connected to you. For our listeners, Bethany and I are not married. We have separate spouses, but we feel such positive relationships with our wedding bands that we've had on our persons for so long. And Charlie feels this just deep dissatisfaction with the fact that he has to wear this ring so often. And for him, removing it is cathartic. It helps him become somebody that he wants to be instead of somebody that he doesn't want to be. So we see in these chapters that Charlie is really good at coming up with stories. Sometimes he comes up with excellent stories about objects that he's never seen before, but he can't really do good stories about himself. When Tress confronts him about the ring, he gives a nervous excuse, like always, but then finally admits a truth to her. He doesn't want her to perceive him as someone he doesn't want to be.
It's such a good point, and it's clear through his stories that he's more than capable of coming up with something believable and well thought out, but I don't think he really wants to lie to Tress. So he tells her these stories that they both know are made up, and this actually leads perfectly into step 2, which is the cognitive realm. How are these characters perceived, and how do they perceive themselves?
What I love about this chapter is that it's all about perception. The whole conversation between Tress and Charlie led to this moment right here when he finally admits his own perception of himself, not a groundskeeper or even a duke's son. He's saying right here that the person he has invented, the person that he is when he is with Tress, is exactly who he wants to be all the time. And I think that's a beautiful thing. He perceives himself essentially as a boy who loves a girl, and that makes this an excellent start to a fairy tale.
I love the way you put that, and it's such a beautiful way to summarize Charlie's character. And this is a perfect example of something I wouldn't have thought of just reading the book by myself. So I'm so glad that we're doing this podcast to really delve further into the text.
Yeah, honestly, I wouldn't have thought of it this way either without reading it through our Shard lenses. And I'm so glad that you said that, because I hope our listeners can follow along and make similar connections as we journey through the Cosmere, things that we might not even connect as we're reading. And that leads us perfectly to step 3, the spiritual realm, which is what can we observe about the connection between these two characters?
You know, this is such an interesting thing to talk about because connection is at the heart of almost everything in the Cosmere. And it's clear that Tress and Charlie have a strong connection together by how much time they choose to spend together, partly due to Charlie's invention of who he is to make up excuses to spend time with her. But in this passage, I really see their emotional connection on full display. They understand each other even without saying something out loud, and Charlie is able to convey a message to Tress just with a simple smile. I see so much beauty in the gentleness of their connection in this passage, and I think they both give each other the space to convey what they need to without pressure or judgment.
That's a perfect way to bring up the connection that these two characters share together. They can talk to each other, really, communicate without saying anything out loud. They can see how the other is feeling or looking, especially when Tress is looking at Charlie and he smiles at her. He gives her one of his signature smiles. And as we read in many of the chapters throughout this book, specifically in the first chapters, we see Charlie has multiple different types of smiles that he uses to communicate different things to Tress. To somebody who doesn't know him, They probably won't see anything different about the way that he's smiling, but because they spend so much time together, they've built that emotional connection. They've built that unseeable connection that helps Tress understand how he's feeling by just looking at him. And that is the perfect way to end this segment, I think, because Charlie has invented this communication method of smiling and using different shapes of his smiles, different ways that he looks when he smiles, to convey to Tress a specific thought or idea. And she's able to pick up on those without any words or signals, just by the connection that they've built together.
Oh, I love the way you put that. And without giving anything away, the next couple of chapters, I'm interested to see how they're able to keep that connection in different avenues and in different ways going throughout the rest of the book.
Yeah, me too. I'm specifically excited to look at the reason Charlie may have started inventing these smiles that he gives Tress. Bethany, earlier you said that a lot of us find ourselves in situations that we don't want to be in. And I think that is the perfect thought to segue into our next and final segment of Cosmere Journeys. Can you tell our listeners about Hoid's advice?
Yes, so if you remember earlier, we mentioned that Hoid is a character who appears in many of the Cosmere novels, and he's one of the few characters who can travel from world to world, classified in the Cosmere as a world hopper. Hoid is extremely old, mischievous, witty, rude to those who deserve it, but most of all, he's kind to nearly everyone else. He's a champion of the everyman, and like Charlie, he's a storyteller. In many of the Cosmere novels, Hoid has a knack for finding people when they need him the most and sharing a story that's meant to help them through their problems, like a fable or an allegory. As much as the Cosmere is about epic magic systems and shards and interconnected worlds, it is also about everyday people and the struggles they go through while rising to the challenges life throws at them. And Hoid understands that sometimes a simple story with some hidden truth is enough to remind people why they should continue to fight, to work, to push through the struggle. And so, since Hoid is such a big part of the Cosmere, and no one can truly go on a Cosmere journey without a little bit of Hoid thrown in the mix, we will end every episode with what we're calling Hoid's advice. So if you're struggling with something, need a morale boost, or just want some general advice about something, shoot us a message and we'll share it here with a story to help you through the problem.
Today we have a message from KC Woodruff, who wrote in saying, "Hi, Bethany and Ben. I have a question about how to overcome creative blocks. I'm an author, and writing has been my passion since I was little. Creative burnout is something we all go through, but mine seems to come on the strongest by seeing and hearing about all the horrible things happening in the world. It makes things like telling stories or fiction or any sort of entertainment feel indulgent or trivial. I know that creation is a form of resistance, but I'd love any suggestions on how to get past this kind of block."
Thank you for sharing that with us, Casey. I think I have the perfect story in mind for this. Hoid tells a story about two blind men sitting atop a cliff, overlooking the land without seeing anything and contemplating beauty. They discuss whether they can truly experience beauty with the absence of sight, and one of the men points out various other ways that beauty can be experienced through the sound of music, the taste of food, the feel of a sculpture, and the kindness of a woman. The other man pushes back and says that what if all of these senses, sight, taste, touch, scent, and hearing were removed? The person would only experience pain. Hoid ends this story with this. What think you? Can beauty be taken from a man? If he could not touch, taste, smell, hear, see, what if all he knew was pain? Has that man had beauty taken away from him? Let us say the pain changes day by day. Then perhaps beauty to that person would be the times when the pain lessens. To be human is to seek beauty. Do not despair. Do not end the hunt because thorns grow in your way. I love this story because I know a lot of us struggle to see beauty in a world bombarding us with doom and gloom headlines and human suffering seemingly everywhere. And although I'm not personally a writer, I also get in creative slumps where my projects seem trivial and when there's so much bad happening around us. I love this reminder from Hoid to continue to hunt for the beauty in our lives and in our art, even though thorns may be growing in our way.
What a great way to answer that question, Bethany. I love this story because it reminds us what it is to be human. And I'm also so glad that you asked this question, Casey, because this is relevant to more than just writing. This is about creation. It's about invention. about finding a new way to use what we have before us to move forward into a better world. The other day I wrote a script for a video and posted it just after the death of Renee Good. Then the death of Alex Preddy followed, and even though I published this video, I continue to feel the crushing guilt of writing stories during times of turmoil, where people are dying in the streets, and so much suffering is happening all around us. But what I said before is still so relevant that I want to say it again right here. In times of disaster, it can seem difficult or even superfluous to focus on creativity when we are still reeling from the aftermath of that disaster. It's even harder still when that disaster was not natural, but imposed by the very powers that are supposed to keep the peace. There is an intersection between creativity and society. What happens with one impacts the other. It might feel pointless to focus on creativity right now. You might feel like there are more important things going on, but I will tell you that one of the greatest forms of protest is creating art that defies the system and tells your community, your county, your country that you will not go silent into that good night. So create, write, draw, sing defiantly, because there is some good in this world, and it's worth fighting for. This has been The Girl and the Groundskeeper, Episode 1 of Cosmere Journeys. I'm Ben Grange.
And I'm Bethany Davidson, and to end every episode, we speak the ancient oaths: life before death, strength before weakness, and most of all, journey before destination.